degrees, humidity 59%.
Casino of the new Morrison Hotel in Chicago. Bobby, the easy new pin curl home permanent for a soft and casual wave. And White Rain, the wonderful new lotion shampoo that leaves your hair sunshine bright. Invite your family to join the millions of families from coast to coast and listen to America's favorite, Don McNeil and his Breakfast Club. And here is your Toastmaster, Don McNeil.
Good morning, Breakfast Clubbers. Morning to ya. Woke up bright and early, just a howdy do ya. It's Bobby's call to breakfast. For all of you out there, America right from Breakfast Club is on the air.
Well, if you remember the Don McNeil Breakfast Club, and you remember the tune and all of that, and it conjures up some memories for you, then you are a bona fide senior, and we welcome you to the Not Just for Seniors program. I'm Jay Herman, your host. We're going to have a two-part program which we would call Conversations With, and these are with special people from Aurora. And our special person today is Charlotte T. Reid, also known as Annette King.
A long time ago.
A long time ago. Well, that Don McNeil program should bring a lot of memories back for you.
It does. Yes, it was a fun time.
I wondered, as I've heard some of the tape which I had secured, did they actually have food there, or did people just come and sit and watch?
No food. No, no, people just watched. And there were lots of people who did come every morning. And it always surprised me that there were so many people out that early.
What was the hour that you went on the air?
8 o'clock.
8 o'clock?
8 to 9, yes.
It was not taped. That had to be live.
No, it was all live, yes.
The Don McNeil Breakfast Club show started in 1933, and you came on board when?
In 1936.
1936, and you were with the show how long?
Until 1939, for almost 3 years. Left when I had my first child.
All right. Well, you didn't have to. With radio, nobody could tell.
No.
Maybe it was a family plan.
Getting up so early in the morning was a little difficult.
Well, you know, that raises questions, because I notice on, the TV has tried to go to cheap programming, and they do the sort of news magazine format, and they start at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Yes.
And those poor people must get up at 3 just to get to the studio.
I got up at, I got up a little before 5 for
and
that.
Slept on the train? Is that what you did when you went in?
No, I'd usually read or think about what I wanted to talk about on the show that day.
Well, that brings
It was
up,
all ad lib, of course.
It was all, really? There was no script or subject matter?
Well, Don had poems and things like that he read, but no, we didn't know what we were going to talk about. I would talk about something I had done the day before.
Everybody bring a story. Is that the program?
Yes, right.
Well, what stories did you bring?
Well, one story, after I was married, I sang for a year after I was married, and then lived in Aurora, and took the train every morning, took the 5:50 train, and we lived
5:50 train. Okay.
5:50, and we lived in our house on 4th and Avon, and the garage had been a coach house, so it was separate from the house, and it had a little stone wall along the side. And when I backed the car out, I backed the car over the stone wall.
Women drivers.
So I ran to the station and got my train, but when I was on the my husband always awakened, turned on
He
radio.
found out about it on the radio.
So I told him on the radio what had happened, that he'd have to look out the window and get a tow truck.
Oh, well, that was a safe distance, wasn't it?
Pardon me?
That was a safe distance.
Yes.
So he couldn't yell at you too much. What station was the Breakfast Club broadcast on?
It was broadcast on NBC. Actually, the NBC at that time was the Blue Network and the Red Network,
yes.
WMAQ and
Before
WLS.
They broke it up then.
Yes, so it was, it was on WMAQ, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
It was on either WMAQ or WLS, one of the networks of NBC.
Well, that was a grind, and you did that for 3 to 4 years.
Yes.
Yes, and began to
But
get bags under. Well, at least you could have bags under your eyes. And, but that's totally amazing to me that you really didn't have a script. You probably just had a very loose format
Yes.
of special things.
Yes, and he had always had prayer time, and he had then he read the poetry, and that was planned. But he would talk with usually each one of us. There was we called them girl singers and boy singers at that time. There was a boy singer. He would talk with him or talk with me, and we'd just talk about our family and our existence day by day, and that I think people related to that very well. That was part of the charm of the program.
I had very wonderfully discovered, with the help of the Chuck Shaden's store in Chicago, to get this tape of anniversary tape of Don McNeil. It was actually one of his anniversary shows back in '53. That would have been his 20th anniversary show. And listening to that, and he came to that prayer time, and the question came to me: was that a sincere part, or was he sort of maybe just playing to the religious people in the audience?
No, Don was a very wonderful man. And this, I think, again, that was the charm of the program, because that came over. People
He was
knew
authentic, yes.
He knew he was sincere and a fine person.
How many people, was it just broadcast in Chicago, or was it broader than Chicago?
No, it went all over the country, and then before I left, it was international.
International?
It was,
You had supplied a book about one of his anniversary years, and we'll be seeing some pictures of that throughout the program. And looking, and I was unaware that there were people, thousands of people would come later on in the 50s perhaps to just to be there and listen and be entertained.
You know, when I went to Washington, when I was in Washington, the show came to Washington, and they played at the Mayflower, and I was on the show, and I was amazed then, because people were actually hanging from the rafters. They couldn't get in. There were so many.
Well, let me ask the question, and that is, how does a sweet, innocent young girl from Aurora, Illinois, get into showbiz and national radio in Chicago?
Perseverance, I guess. I really,
a lot of hard work.
Yes, I had no contacts, and just when I went in the first time to really try, I had a cousin in Chicago, and I stayed with her for a month, and just went to all of the stations and tried to be heard. And I did get some auditions. I started at the top, of course, and had no luck there. So then started going to all these little stations all over town, and finally went to a station out on the west side, WGES, which was I didn't really know when I went out there, but it was a foreign language station.
All right.
So they had programs in German and Polish and Italian, and they did let me sing for them, and they hired me. And so I say hired loosely because I was not paid, but I had.
You were hired but not paid.
Not paid.
That sounds like the way it is around here. Okay.
I had a 15-minute program with a piano. And then someone from Nelson Brothers heard me, and so they did hire me for $5 a week. And
Nelson Brothers Furniture?
Nelson Brothers Furniture.
Okay.
For
I think I bought some stuff because of you.
And then that $5 a week paid at that time for a round-trip weekly ticket from Aurora to Chicago. So
you got your traveling.
I got my travel, yes. But then during that time, Louise Gilbert, who was quite a well-known coach in Chicago, heard me and asked me to come and sing for her, which I did. And she said she would like to help me, and she was an agent also. And she said, now anything you do after this, I get 10%, which was fine.
Okay.
And we had no written contract, but this happened through the years. And she was very helpful to me. I would go, I had no money for lessons, so I would go every day, and she said if I would be willing to answer the phone for her or do a few errands, well, then she would give me lessons in between lessons. So I would have 10 minutes here and 10 minutes there. And then she heard, she's the one who heard of Breakfast Club audition, and I... How
many girls showed up at that?
Well, there were lots. I had said 100, but I think perhaps I was being, it looked like 100 to me, but I would say there were
Staggering
at least
number.
50 or 60, and I was the last one to sing. And I waited all day to sing. And by that time I was tired and nervous, but I did get the job.
One of the things I learned on the tape was that when Don McNeil opened up his Breakfast Club show back in 1933, he opened up with this musical selection, and we'll get some reflections from you about it after we hear a little bit of it. It's called The Mustard's Too Hot.
Too much mustard in the pot and makes the beans too hot. Your kisses hit the spot, just cool it down. Too much ketchup, too much spice, can spoil the shrimp and rice. Oh, babe, take my advice, cool those kisses down.
Hello, I'm Patricia Reid Lindner, and I've been a member of the Illinois General Assembly for 8 years. On August 3, 2000, the Republican Party met in Philadelphia, where they nominated Texas Governor George W. Bush for President of the United States and former Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney for Vice President. Back on June 17, 1856, the Republicans held their first national convention, also in Philadelphia, at which they nominated General John C. Fremont of California for president. Fremont and his running mate, William L. Dayton, were not successful, but they did set the stage for Illinoisian Abraham Lincoln and the Republican Party to mount a victorious campaign in 1860. The nation was deeply divided over the issue of slavery, and in 1854, when Senator Stephen A. Douglas of Illinois proposed a bill to allow slavery in the new territories joining the United States, people began to look for a political organization to oppose what they strongly felt to be morally wrong. Like-minded anti-slavery people began to meet all across the nation. In Wisconsin, a group of former Whigs and Democrats, along with Free Soil and Know-Nothings, met in Ripon, Wisconsin on February 28, 1854, and later held a state convention in Madison on July 13, 1854. Likewise, a group met in Jackson, Michigan on July 6, 1854, and held a convention under the Oaks. Ann started to do the same. Both towns later claimed to be the birthplace of the Republican Party. The citizens of Aurora were no different. They too were upset about the repeal of the Missouri Compromise, which was passed by both houses of Congress and signed by President Polk. A meeting was held in August of 1854 in Geneva, Illinois, to discuss forming a new party. It was decided to call a convention in Aurora on September 20th to form such a party and nominate candidates. This meeting was to be held at the First Congregational Church in Aurora. The church had been one of the stops of the Underground Railroad and was strongly opposed to slavery. At that meeting, 207 delegates named themselves Republicans and nominated James H. Woodworth of Chicago as the candidate for the 2nd Congressional District. Woodworth was elected as a Republican to the 34th Congress. In 1856, John F. Farnsworth was elected as the Republican congressman from the 2nd District. He would leave Congress at the start of the Civil War, lead the famous 8th Illinois Cavalry, and then return to his seat in 1863. He rose to the rank of Brigadier General. So even before there was a state or a national party, people in Aurora were already calling themselves Republicans and had elected the same to represent them. For this and other reasons, some people thought that Aurora was really the birthplace of the party. Tradition has, however, given that distinction to Ripon, Wisconsin. In spite of losing this bit of historical fame, Aurora has maintained a strong Republican character and has remained an important stop on many a presidential campaign trail, no matter what the party. Teddy Roosevelt made his way to Aurora in 1903 to demonstrate his affection for the city. The Roosevelt Aurora American Legion Post No. 84 is named for his son Quentin, who was killed in the First World War. In 1938, the unsuccessful Republican standard-bearer of 1936, Alf Landon, former governor of Kansas, came to Aurora to speak at the 100th anniversary of the First Congregational Church and to celebrate its place in the founding of the Republican Party. Perhaps the greatest excitement and the largest crowds of current times were generated by the visit of General Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1952. The crowd that greeted him at the Old City Hall that September was estimated at 12,000. Eisenhower said that he was overwhelmed by the size of the audience and the friendliness of the people of Aurora. Many people still talk of the day when a young senator from Massachusetts, John F. Kennedy, came into town to promote his candidacy for president. They mention where they were, when they saw him, or how they got a chance to shake his hand. George H. Bush came to the Fox Valley many times as a party leader and as a candidate. On one occasion, he spoke at the Aurora Township Lincoln Day dinner at the Marmion Gym. He was chairman of the Republican National Central Committee at that time. And this was a time of political turmoil because the Nixon-Watergate scandal was just beginning to surface. In 1996, Senator Bob Dole of Kansas made a visit to Peyton's Roundhouse in Aurora to energize the Republican troops, hoping that Aurora and Illinois could help him win the White House. Politics has played a major role in the life and history of Aurora. And though its claim to be the birthplace of the Republican Party has been generally ignored, Aurora can at least claim to have been in the delivery room when the new political baby was born. But even without this historical celebrity, Aurora has produced its share of national leaders. There was Senator Albert Hopkins, a friend of Teddy Roosevelt, and there was Congressman Ira Copley, whose personal achievements went well beyond the halls of Congress. And of course, there is Aurora's current Congressman, J. Dennis Hastert, Speaker of the House, who has not only brought political honor and personal distinction to himself and to his party, but also to the city. And I must also add to this list my own personal favorites. My grandfather, Frank R. Reid, U.S. Congressman for 5 terms, from 1923 to 1935, and my mother, Charlotte T. Reid, U.S. Congresswoman from 1963 to 1971.
And we're back again on Not Just for Seniors. This is a conversation with Annette King, who also traveled sometimes with the name of Charlotte Reid. And this Mustard's Too Hot was, you didn't get to hear enough of it. I heard the whole thing with some lyrics. And it really talks about a guy who says, honey, when I'm going off to work in the morning, don't get me all steamed up because I may not want to go. And I'm thinking, that's kind of a wild piece of music to be playing at a breakfast club. Well, it's breakfast music.
Yes.
But when I mentioned that to you, you said that was a piece that your mother knew.
My mother used to really play that with gusto on the piano, yes.
Well, were you aware of what signals she was sending to your dad at the time?
Yeah, we had that. I never knew the lyrics.
Okay.
I don't know if she did.
Well, the music part of it brought up another question. It sounds like you had an orchestra there. Was there a band?
We had a wonderful band. Walter Bloffus was the director of the band at that time. Eddie Ballantyne, who played trumpet in the band when I was there, became the director later on after I left. But it was about a 15-piece band. And they were really wonderful musicians. Most of them had classical background, had played in the symphony, and
did they like getting up early in the morning too?
Well, everyone was there.
They showed up. Yeah.
Sleepy-eyed.
Well, I guess one of the questions would be the motivation. Now, knowing some of the background of your family, the Thompsons, your mother and father were musically inclined. What did they do? Did they perform or just enjoy music?
No, just. We had music at home from as long as I can remember. We didn't play cards, not because we objected, but we just liked the music. So when we had any free time, we'd sit down, and my mother played. It was before we had a piano. We didn't get a piano till I was about, I guess, 8 or 9 years old. My mother played the Hawaiian guitar, you know, with the steel bar, and my father and I played ukuleles, and we harmonized. And we were pretty good. We had a lot of fun anyway.
But did you perform outside the home?
We did, not with my father, but my mother and I did, at church, programs at church or something like that. So we were
Did you
always
sing The Mustard's Too Hot at church?
No, we didn't. We didn't sing that.
Leave that best at home. Well, let me, you were born in Kankakee.
Yes.
And then moved to Aurora, and you're an East Aurora High School Tomcat.
Yes.
Graduated in the 30s.
1930.
1930? And the like. So what does the little message under your picture say? Most likely to become famous, or?
Oh, I don't even remember.
You don't even remember?
No, and you know that we had our flood in '96, and that was lost in the flood. I lost a lot of.
What, were you performing and singing while you were in high school then?
Did whenever there was a show or a review, I was on that, and I did that when I went to college too.
And in college, you were going to prepare for what?
I was going to be a teacher.
A noble profession, yes.
Which is, I admire teachers very much, but I felt that I found out anyway that I was, at least I felt that I was not cut out to be a teacher.
Well, tell me the conversation that took place around your breakfast table when you told Mom and Dad, I'm dropping out of college and I'm going to go to Chicago and make my name.
Consternation at first, but they were very supportive, and they knew how much music meant to me and how much I loved to sing, and they supported me through the years, certainly.
Well, maybe was the agreement based upon the fact that you change your name to Annette King and not give your real name on there?
Well, you know, I didn't do that. As I said, I went to WGES, and the first day I came in to sing, they said, well, we have a name for you, because Charlotte Thompson is not a good name for it. Got in
not on an
Showtime.
ethnic radio station.
So we've chosen Annette King, and how they found that, I don't know, but that I took it.
Well, while you're mentioning, what was it, WG what?
WGES.
WGES. We have a couple of newspaper ads which you provided us. One of them sort of says, Cleopatra look, Annette King, kind of a sultry singer. This wasn't the breakfast time, I hope. That's a little early for that kind of a
Well, you know, I was on Breakfast Club, but actually I was signed as a staff artist. So NBC used me on other shows. I sang on a show at night with a big orchestra, larger, about a 25-piece orchestra. Roy Steele was the director. He was of that orchestra, and I did that once a week. And then there was a show with organ. I did 15 minutes with that. And then when there were soap operas at NBC at that time, and when they needed a singer on one of the soap operas, I would sing on that. And then after AFRA, American Federation of Radio Artists, came into being, they had to limit the hours that they could use us, and we were able also to have
a life
to have commercials, so commercial programs. So I had a program with Lipton Tea, and that was with an organ, and a poet who would read a poem, and then I would sing a song that was appropriate for that poem. It was sort of a little different format.
Worked probably a little bit more in advance than what you told me Don McNeil
yes.
did. And that. Well, what was your experience here? You're knocking on doors and say, "Give me a try," and
yes.
the like. What do people out here think, that Charlotte's crazy, you know, or this is Charlotte's
I don't know that people were
paid any attention?
Really too much aware of what I was doing, frankly.
What happened when, with Annette King, they
well,
probably didn't know.
They knew then, I'm sure,
okay.
but when I was really looking for a job,
okay.
I don't know that people were aware of that here.
So I bet when you went back to your high school reunion, the women there hated you, didn't they? Gee.
Had lots of good friends.
You had good friends. They
yes.
didn't hold it against you,
no.
your success. Or were there any experiences that you had while you were working in Chicago? I had heard on Chuck Shaden that sometimes performers would work for different stations, and they'd have to run across the bridge, and on one occasion the bridge went up and the guy was not able to make his next show.
Well, I didn't do that because I was at the Merchandise Mart for all of my shows. And so before I went to Breakfast Club, I did audition with, well, not an audition, but I think it was Sammy Kaye was there, and he had a night where he would have people who were not completely amateurs, but would give them a chance to be heard. And I was on that, and then there was an orchestra at WGN, Gene Goldket's orchestra. They were on every Sunday night, and I was on that. So I did have a chance to do a few things before I went to NBC.
All right. Some of the people, I was amazed looking at that book from 1947 about Don McNeil, but the number of people that either came on, again, looking for work, trying to find a place to do their thing, Who are some of those that stand out in your mind that maybe we would recognize now?
Well, I don't know that Fibber McGee and Molly were there.
That was before they had their own show then?
No, they had their own show.
But they also worked otherwise, okay.
They had their own show.
What's his name, Jim something? Okay, okay,
Yeah,
I can't
gone.
remember. I love listening to him on
yes,
the Chuck Shade show.
they were wonderful. Then Johnny Johnston went to Hollywood and did fairly well. Clark Dennis, these are names that you wouldn't remember, but they did do pretty well in those
Well, what about
days.
Kukla, Fran, and Ollie?
And Fran Allison came to NBC about a year after I did. And she started as a singer also to begin with. And Fran really had a very lovely voice. Then she was so very clever and witty, and she wrote this show called Aunt Fanny. And she became Aunt Fanny on Don's show.
Well, I heard a bit on this tape I got, Aunt Fanny, and she does kind of a country bumpkin. I think she's supposed to be from Kansas or something like that.
Well, she was
and when I
from
found out
Iowa.
that was Fran Allison, I couldn't believe it because in Kukla and Fran, I always thought of her as being rather sophisticated and, you know, this kind of
Not
thing.
at all.
Not at all?
No.
Well,
not at all.
okay. What was she like?
Just a wonderful, wonderful, warm person and a very good friend and funny. She really had a wonderful wit.
As we beginning to run down here on time a little bit with this program, I want to mention that there's going to be a part 2. We hope you'll join us next week for that. You also appeared in Aurora. I guess Aurora thought, well, they could imitate the Breakfast Club as well. And that was with, what, Bud Paxton?
Yes, that was after I was married. Bud Paxton started a show called Breakfast with Bud, and we did that every morning for, I don't know, several months, which was kind of fun.
And it looked like you were in a nice restaurant or whatever,
Yes,
and it looked like a lot of fun. That kind of a thing. Radio was not only a way that you could express your artistic abilities and talent, but it also had a factor in playing in your marriage, didn't it?
It did. My father-in-law, who became my father-in-law, was a radio buff. And he had been a member of Congress for 12 years.
Yes.
And he had an office in New Orleans, and he listened wherever he went. And he, one time, said to his son, he said, you know, there's a girl from Aurora singing on Breakfast Club. You ought to get to know her. So he followed through with that.
So you followed through, huh?
Yes.
And what happened?
We got married.
You got married. Okay, so we go from Annette King now back to Charlotte Thompson, and Charlotte Thompson becomes Charlotte Thompson Reid.
Yes.
And the like. Are there any Thompsons in the family that have kept up the musical tradition?
Well, there aren't very many Thompsons left, frankly, but in my family, certainly, the musical tradition is going on. My older daughter, Pat, who is now a member of the state legislature, has a beautiful voice, and she started her career singing, went to New York and sang, and she and George Linder, her husband, have 4 children who are all very musically inclined. My other daughter, Susie, has a beautiful voice. She's a little shy about using it, but she does have a lovely voice.
And who is Jonathan? Is that Pat's son?
Jonathan is Pat's second son, Pat and George's second son.
Okay. Charlotte, we thank you very much for being on part 1
I've
of our
enjoyed
conversations about your radio days. And we thank also Bill Novotny, who is working camera, and also we want to thank Joyce Rulin, who is working as our floor director today, Dan Nyde, master control and editor, and also Patricia Mulligan, who is our executive producer. Thank you for being with us. Join us again next time when we go to part 2 with Charlotte Reid Goes to Congress. And welcome to Not Just for Seniors. I'm Jay Harriman, your host. This is part 2 of a conversation with Charlotte T. Reid, the T standing for Thompson. And if you were with us on the first half of our 2-part series, you'll know that she also used the radio name of Annette King, which was just sort of given to her by one of her first jobs on radio in Chicago. And Charlotte, it's amazing that anyone could sort of just run into Chicago and crash through the barriers there and break into radio. Chicago was the one of the big media towns in the country at the time.
It was the hub of radio at that time.
Everything came out of here.
But it took a while.
To crash it? Or
Yes.
Well, we're sort of calling this program Mrs. Reid Goes to Washington. And I hope that some of you will remember the Jimmy Stewart movie of a different name, Mr.
Yes.
Smith Goes to Washington. And one of the things, just being a tourist and going there and standing in different places and looking at the monuments and the people, it's very awe-inspiring. But how did it feel? Here you are, now you're elected representative, congresswoman from Illinois. How does it feel to go in and sit down and take your chair?
It was almost overwhelming, really. The first day, when I was sworn in that first day, my children were in the balcony, and it was to think of the history of this room and all that had transpired there. It's just awe-inspiring, really. And I never lost that. And particularly walking from my office to the Capitol, and when we'd be in session at night and seeing the flag flying over the Capitol, I never ceased to feel it and get a lump in my throat.
I heard a program the other night with Michael Deaver, who's written the book on Ronald Reagan.
Yes.
And he said one of the great things about Reagan was that he understood that the man was not the job and the job was not the man. He knew he was only filling the chair for a while. And so that's a great thing. But I could understand going there and saying, I'm a part of this history, this huge
Yes.
chain of things and that sort of
also
stuff.
the feeling of responsibility that you have for the people in your district. And you want to do the best you can every day.
Well, did you?
I tried.
You tried. Well, one of the things you did, and we have a picture of that, is that you may have broken some, not protocol, but at least some of the existing mores and styles of the time. But the picture says that you may have been the first woman to appear in the Congressional House with a pantsuit on.
I did. It was one Christmas, and we were in session till the day before Christmas, actually. And my staff gave me this really lovely black wool pantsuit, and I put it on in my office, and we had a quorum call, so I went over in the pantsuit.
No time to put on the proper skirt.
I remember Jerry Ford saw me walking down the aisle, and he came over and said he liked it.
Okay. So did that set people in Washington talking?
No, I think not. It took a little more than that to get them talking.
We hear a lot today about the Beltway.
Yes.
And the like. And was the Beltway a major influence, minor influence when you were there? The people who lived in Washington, and that's...
Well, you do hear about people going to Washington and then getting inside the Beltway and forgetting about the rest of the country or about their districts, whatever. But I felt that I didn't feel that I got Potomac fever. I did come back home.
Yes,
and,
that's true.
And I did come home frequently, at least every other week, sometimes every weekend. And
more difficult then than it would be now.
Yes, but kept in touch with my constituents and felt that I never lost that.
Well, we need to, excuse me, we need to loop back a little bit because there was a card you gave me. It says, put a fighting tomcat in Washington.
Yes.
But that tomcat was a different person.
Yes.
And so tell us how you became Congresswoman from this district.
My husband had been very much involved in politics, and as I said, his father had been a member of Congress for 12 years. So I think he always had it in the back of his mind to run for Congress. And when the time was right, the Noah Mason, who was the incumbent from LaSalle County, retired. 8 men ran for the primary, and it was a hard-fought primary, and my husband won. And I was very much involved with his campaign. I went with him every day, from the factory gates in the morning, to the coffees, to the luncheons, the meetings at night. And when there were conflicting meetings, he would go to one and I to another. So I was very much involved. Then he won the primary that was in April in 1962. And then, unfortunately, died August 25th of that year of a heart attack. And I had never had any thought of being involved in politics, being a candidate myself. But the 5 county chairmen were the ones who selected the person to run, and there was a lot of controversy at the time about who should run, but they did choose me. At first, I thought no, but then I really realized I had to do something with my life, and I talked with my children. They urged me to run, and I did. And then I went back. I felt people should see me as a candidate. So I went back, retraced our steps, went all through the counties. I had 2 months, had a lot of help from family and friends, and we just had a whirlwind campaign. And I did win. I felt that first campaign, there was a lot of sympathy connected with that.
Yes.
But the 4 succeeding campaigns, I felt that I did that on my own merits.
You earned those, yes. Very good. We had a similar experience just recently with the Missouri Senate candidate.
Yes.
And I can never remember the name, but he was killed in the air crash, and then his
Yes.
wife was asked to serve and actually won the election.
And of course, he had already won the election, so she took his place.
Okay.
Didn't have to campaign the way I had to campaign.
Yes.
That was the difference.
But it's interesting to me that it would be intimidating because you had not prepared yourself mentally other than to be the wife of.
No.
All right.
Of course, I also had the feeling that I could carry on for my husband if I did this.
But the district did put a fighting tomcat in Washington, didn't they? Either, one way or the other. Just a brief thing about your father-in-law, another Frank Reid.
Yes.
And you surprised me about your husband. He went by what name?
Well, he was known by all of his friends and family as Bud.
As Bud,
yes,
right, okay.
Yes.
He wasn't Frank Jr.
No, well, he was Frank Jr., but they
didn't call him
They
that.
called him Bud.
Okay. But just an aside, your father-in-law served, I think, from 23 up to about 33, somewhere in there. And I realized he was in Congress when the Depression came into being.
Yes, he was.
Did he ever talk about either his frustrations or his sense of impotence about dealing with such a horrible thing that our country was experiencing?
No, not really. He was, of course, when I knew him, he was not in Congress, so
Yes.
our conversations were about the current
Current things, all right.
things.
But as I was looking at his time in Congress, he had experienced that and tried to cope as an elected official to find some kind of a solution.
And you know, he also represented Billy Mitchell in his famous court-martial trial.
Yes.
And there's a movie.
Yes.
Ralph Bellamy takes the part of Frank Reid in that.
Oh, really? Bellamy plays Frank Reid. All right. And Gary Cooper played Billy Mitchell.
Right.
Now, we both have revealed our age, haven't we?
Yes.
Let's quickly talk about the presidents that you served with. John F. Kennedy was the first.
Went in when President Kennedy was there. Then, of course, President Johnson, President Nixon, Jerry Ford, then Carter.
You've seen quite a few?
I was in Washington when President Reagan was there, and he did appoint me to a commission. So I was involved with him at that time, but not serving.
Well, let me ask a personal question, because I've seen some pictures at your home around pianos with people. Of the presidents that you knew, which one sung the best?
Well, President Nixon played piano.
He
loved to play the piano.
That is true. There was a little bit of a freshman initiation for new congressmen back in '63 when you came there. And George Bush just paid his dues with a sort of a media roast and a sort of self-deprecation. Tell us about your initiation to Congress back in '63.
Well, the American Federation of Women in Radio and Television have a dinner for the new members, honoring the new members of Congress, and they invite all of the members of Congress and spouses, and they ask someone to represent the new members, so they asked me to represent the new members who would come into the 88th Congress. And they asked me a question, and I was supposed to respond however I chose, and my question was, you sang for your breakfast, now what will your tune be in the House? And
What was your tune?
this is what I did. It would be called a rap now, I think. Ladies and gentlemen, you stated that I sang for my breakfast in years gone by. Well, it's true that I sang many years ago, but the tune is so different in the Washington show. I sang about June and the stars above, then I threw in the moon and a bit of love. Now the tune is so simple, though tried and true, about economy and government and what's best for you. I won't forget the national debt. I'll do my best to curb that deficit. These complicated problems require finesse, but at times it takes finesse for success. Now, it's been said that a woman like me should be seen and not heard in such company. So I'll sing very softly in harmony, then I'll add a touch of counter melody, just to prove that I appreciate this chance to serve and to legislate. Now, I hope you'll accept this jest in rhyme, for I couldn't resist beating the time. But I promise you, I won't digress. Well, I'm a member of Congress. Well, I'm a member of Congress.
That is fantastic.
It was fun.
They got more than they had expected, right? And we are going to take a break, and we'll be back more with Charlotte Reid after this.
Hello, my name is Dick Hausman, and I'm chaplain of the Grand Army of the Republic Aurora Post 20 Memorial Association. The date was October 26, 1947, and a page of Aurora's history was turned for the last time. That was the 106th birthday of Daniel Augustus Wedge, Civil War veteran. Uncle Dan, as most people called him, had passed away that morning, but his memory lives on in the minds and the hearts of many of Aurora's longtime residents. Born in Marietta, Ohio in 1841, his family moved to Illinois in 1851, locating near Kewanee. When the Civil War broke out, 19-year-old Dan enlisted into Company D, 17th Illinois Volunteer Infantry, and with this unit, he took part in such battles as Vicksburg, Shiloh, and Pittsburgh Landing. After his discharge from the service, he returned to the farm. In 1871, he married, and with his bride moved to Aurora. Then Dan began his service with the Burlington Railroad, and he retired as full conductor after 35 years of dedication. So he now had more time for an active interest in the operations of Aurora Post 20 Grand Army of the Republic, and he served several terms as the post commander. In 1931, Dan suffered a debilitating fall and was confined to his bed the rest of his life. His daughter Mabel was at his side until his passing. But in 1938, Dan had organized the Post 20 Memorial Association to oversee the care and the preservation of the GAR Memorial Hall and Military Museum in downtown Aurora. And each of his last 16 years, Uncle Dan was in a lead unit in their annual Armistice Day parades. He always rode in an open car so he could wave to the crowd and they would wave back. At the time of his passing, past Commander Daniel Augustus Wedge was the second oldest surviving member of the Grand Army of the Republic. And it's interesting to note that he lived during the times of the Mexican War, the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, World War I, and World War II. Rest in peace, Uncle Dan. You're not forgotten.
And we're still moving on here on Not Just for Seniors. And we're having a conversation with Charlotte T. Reid. And Charlotte, that was fantastic. And I asked you when we took the break if 90% of the congressmen were hams and liked to have the limelight and entertainment. And You said probably all of them.
Well, you have to be able to appear before the public, you know.
Yes, and that is most evident with the Bush teams, and that is you can be perhaps a very dedicated, a very intelligent, or a very effective president, but if you don't have the touch of Dutch, with Ronald Reagan or Bill Clinton, who was very good at communicating and getting people wrapped, that you've lost maybe half your arsenal.
Yes.
And that sort of thing. You had mentioned something earlier about being a woman in Congress.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, you've denied this, but I've read that your staff in Washington was all women.
Not true.
The people that made the coffee and got the newspapers were guys, right?
I did have the majority of women.
Majority
I guess
of
I
women.
felt a little more comfortable, but I had 2 men on my staff, and one ultimately became my AA.
What's an AA?
Administrative assistant.
Administrative assistant.
Yes.
All right. And
but you know, when I went to Congress, of course, there were 13 women in the Congress, 1 in the Senate, and 12 in the House, and I've been asked if I felt discriminated against, and I really didn't. I felt that I was given every opportunity to express myself, and I think perhaps one reason is because there were so few women, we were more visible. But you were always aware also that it was a man's world, and the attitude, you felt that attitude of it being a man's world. And why wouldn't it be? Out of 535 members, there were only 13 women. And of course today it's better, but still have a long ways to go. I think there are 9 in the Senate now and 40-some in the House. So their strides have been made, but it's still a small percentage.
well, the thing, as you know, is that you don't run for president or senator as your first candidacy. So the women, which they're doing now, you want to talk about a trickle factor, they're trickling up, percolating up.
Mm-hmm.
You serve school boards, you serve city mayors, you serve as lieutenant governors or governors.
Yes.
And then you begin to serve at a different, at the national level. You've earned it, and there are many more women doing that and moving up.
Well, you know, women certainly have more choices today than they've ever had. And I think they're meeting the challenges and meeting them, earning their honors through their qualifications rather than just being women.
Yes.
And of course, you know, all women have asked for through the years is equal rights, equal opportunity, and freedom of choice. And I think that's not too much to expect.
In the overall picture, and you served from 63 to 71 in the Congress.
Yes.
And then went on to a post with the FCC. During your period in Congress, were you, some people became troubled because it moved so slowly. Mm-hmm. Things to get done, and it's not an executive thing, do it and it gets done.
Yes.
You've got to do a lot of schmoozing and work and stuff.
Yes.
What was your feeling working there?
It was frustrating.
Oh, frustrating. Okay.
That part of it was very frustrating because it did move very slowly. I guess what saved the frustration is that you were always so busy
Okay.
on something, so that you didn't have a chance to dwell on it.
Were there any good surprises, any bad surprises in your congressional experience?
I would say that the camaraderie was something that I enjoyed, and it was just I was a Republican, and but I had many friends on the Democratic side of the aisle, and after session we would disagree on the floor, but after session there would be maybe a dinner or something at night. We'd all get together, and we had lots of song fests when Tip O'Neill became
back to the song fest.
Right.
Huh?
Tip O'Neill became speaker. He loved to sing, and wherever he would be,
Irishmen,
we'd
huh?
sing. And Bob Michael, who became minority leader, had a beautiful voice. So we did a lot of singing, which was fun.
President Bush has said he wanted to bring civility back, and I think Denny Hastert has talked about making the House more civil. About being able to do what you just described.
Yes.
I don't know whether you've been around the current congressional circles, but was it a more civil time when you were there than it is now?
Yes, when I talk with a few people who are still there, they say it's completely different, that you don't have the feeling of camaraderie, as I mentioned, and it's very, I hate to use cutthroat, but I think it is.
So that the arguments on the floor go out the door and go to dinner then,
Yes.
huh? And the people can't
Yes.
release.
I don't say that that's true with everyone, but I think that happens
that-
more than it did then.
And I would think that as a politician that would sort of consume you if you weren't careful.
Yes, I think
you
it
would
could.
be angry and
Yes,
bitter all
yes.
the time.
You spoke of Denny Hastert. I think we're so fortunate to have him and have him be Speaker. I think he has given this the Congress a tone that it really needed of stability and dignity.
Yes, we had a little bit too much image
Yes.
with Newt, I'm afraid.
Yes.
That Newt liked confrontation, and that was his
Yes.
style. And that sometimes that worked, and sometimes it makes you too much in the news. What were your committee assignments that you?
I didn't get what I wanted when I went
You
to
were a
Congress.
freshman congresswoman,
Yes, I
yeah.
got Interior and Insular Affairs and Public Works. And I wanted appropriations, and eventually I did get appropriations.
So was Danny Rostenkowski around about that time?
He was chairman of Ways and Means at that time.
What were your responsibilities in those areas? What would the committees be?
Well, I was
oversight
put on 2 subcommittees of national parks and our trust territories. And every other year, when a new Congress came in, Chairman Wayne Aspinall from Colorado had the committee on trust territory travel to the trust territories to actually see where our funds were being used. And
a trust territory would be what?
Oh, Virgin Islands, Samoa, Guam, the Marianas, all through the South Pacific. So, and it might sound like a junket, but it was a hard-working trip, because when we would get to through the Marianas, for instance, we had to fly in a seaplane, and it was a rickety old plane, I thought, and we landed on the water, and then we would go into these islands, and we'd meet with the officials and with people there to see what was going on in the islands. And then when we got to Guam, they were going on to, I forget where, but anyway, I felt that I could miss that part of the trip, so I wanted to go to Vietnam and wanted to see what was happening there. This was in 1965. And so I paid my own way to Vietnam, went to Vietnam, and of course I had contacted the military there and told them what I wanted to do, what I wanted to see. And my main thought was to meet with as many of the men from Illinois as I could, which I did. They flew me out onto an aircraft carrier and landed on the aircraft carrier, which was an experience in itself, and being catapulted off was...
Was it the USS Charlotte Reid?
But I had lunch with the Illinois men there, and then when I came home, I had I contacted as many as I could of the families of these men with whom I had talked, and it seemed to mean so much to them.
Well, it meant a lot to me, because when you showed me that picture of the newspaper article, there was a familiar face to me, and his name is Dominic Leone, Jr. He was a PFC, he was with the Big One, and the like. So I'm going to show Dominic a copy of that picture. You met with General Westmoreland while you were there?
We did, yes. I had a briefing with him.
And the people, when you were there in '65, the Vietnamese people, did you have a sense we were helping them, or that we were just making their life miserable? What was?
Well, I felt that we shouldn't have been there in the first place, but I felt that since we were there, we should be there to win the war. And I think the Vietnamese people were the ones I met were very friendly. And of course, as I talked with the men, I got the feeling that they felt that they were there to serve their country, and that but they wanted to get this over. And I think if I had gone later, maybe in the late '60s, there might have been a completely different feeling.
Changing.
Yes.
Well, that was, I'm sure, a moving experience, because you also had a couple of, was it grandkids that were in military at the time?
Yes.
Not necessarily there, but
no,
it's always
well,
a potential.
my one son was in the Marines. He did not serve in Vietnam, but my other son, Tommy, was in the Navy, and he was on a ship in the China Sea and served in the Vietnam War in the Navy.
So it wasn't kind of a, what shall I, detached interest. You had a personal commitment and involvement in that area. Briefly, President Nixon asked you to step aside from Congress and go to one of the hot commissions, the FCC.
Yes.
You were there how long?
I was there 5 years.
5 years, all right.
Yes.
And so you got even with all those people that slighted you on the way up to your radio career?
Yes.
We had asked you in our first part, when we were talking about your musical career, if there were any Thompsons or Reids in music, and you'd mentioned then that you have a daughter that sort of followed you and her grandfather and her father into politics.
Yes, Pat. Patsy, as we call her.
Okay, Patsy, okay. She's going to hear that one. And she's serving in the General Assembly in the state of Aurora, working now, even as we speak.
She is.
All right. Do you give her pointers about how to do this?
She doesn't need pointers.
She doesn't need pointers.
No, but I have worked with her on her campaigns, which I've enjoyed very much.
It's always easier to campaign for somebody else
than
yourself.
It is.
I found that out as well. Charlotte, I am so pleased that you've given us this opportunity to talk with you. And Annette King must have been a fabulous lady and a lot of fun for you. And, you know, in a way, you might be the envy of a lot of women, if not men, in this area, and that is you've sort of done and had it all. You've had an entertainment career nationally, you had a family, and then you went on to distinction to serve your country and your people. That's marvelous.
I feel very privileged. Really, it was an honor and a privilege, certainly, to serve this district, and I had so many wonderful friends who supported me through the years. And then I feel so blessed because I had my children and their spouses who were so loving and caring. And then to get grandchildren, I have 8 grandchildren and their spouses, and they're now great-grandchildren, and they really have given me a whole new dimension to my life. It's really exhilarating.
Well, again, I thank you so very much for being with us on Not Just for Seniors. We hope to see you more around town.
Thank you.
Our guest, of course, is Charlotte T. Reid, former Congresswoman from, I don't know what the district number was.
It was 15 then.
15, all right, and soon to be reduced by a couple more numbers, I guess, here in Illinois. Thanks again, Charlotte.
Thank you, Jay.
And we want to thank people that assist us here at the studio, Bill Novotny on camera, Joyce Rulin, who is our floor director, Dan Knight, who's master control and editor, Patricia Mulligan, our executive producer, and we want to thank you for being with us. We hope that you've enjoyed our conversation with Congresswoman Reid as much as we have. Please join us again next time here on Not Just for Seniors.